Now, Iron Fist is a character that, before the show came out, I had very little knowledge on. Like, I knew of him from Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes and the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, but other than knowing his origin, which I think is a really cool concept, I mean, I even made a whole video breaking down his origin issues. So, at the time of Marvel and Netflix releasing the first season of Iron Fist, most of my major knowledge came from that show. I mean, now, most of my knowledge comes from the Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker's run on the Immortal Iron Fist, and because of that, I really like Iron Fist as a character. So, going back to that show in preparation for Season 2, well, I got some things to say about it. Now, before we fully dive into the review, I have to say, when I first watched the show, I didn't fully hate it. The first couple of episodes were definitely a drag, but as it went on, I think it got a lot better, especially pacing-wise. But now, well, let's just get straight into it. Now, the pacing of the show is incredibly slow. Episodes 1 to 4 are just an absolute drag. So the show starts off with young billionaire Danny Rand returning to New York City after he spent 15 years in the mystical city of Kunlun. And when he returns back to Rand Enterprises, everyone he knows doesn't believe it's really him. So instead of trying to prove to everyone that he is Danny Rand by saying things that only the real Danny Rand would know, he starts acting like a lunatic and starts yelling to everybody that he's Danny Rand. And he just does some of the most idiotic things, like he breaks into Joy's house, he threatens Ward with a gun, and it's just really ridiculous. And what makes that even worse is that when he goes to Jerry Hogarth, he starts telling her things that only the real Danny Rand would know. So my question is, why didn't he do this from the beginning? It makes him come across as really stupid. I get that he would be a little naive, like how he doesn't suspect that Joy would drug him and send him to a mental hospital because he remembers the Joy from 15 years ago. But when he's in the mental hospital, instead of being smart and saying things that only the real Danny Rand would say, he lies about faking a passport, and even when the doctors start to believe that he is Danny Rand, when they ask him where he's been for 15 years, he starts rambling off about a mystical city that appears only every 15 years in another dimension. Why didn't you just say you were trained by monks in a monastery in the Himalayas? You could have gotten yourself out of the mental hospital a lot faster than you already did. And then what makes it even worse is that literally at the end of the very same episode he breaks out. It's like he was only in there because they wanted to set up the main theme for Danny, which is, are you Danny Rand or are you the Iron Fist? And now, everything that happens at the Rand Company is inconsequential and doesn't add up to anything. Danny forcing them to sell the drugs at cost? Besides some bad press, nothing of real consequence. Now, what about the Rand nuclear plant? You know, the one that was suspected of giving people cancer? Never comes back. Now, an argument could be made that this is the reason for why Joy, Danny, and Wood get ousted from the company. Well, then the counter-argument to that is that it all gets undone in the next episode, and it was completely pointless. Ultimately, the point of the Rand Company is just a means to connect the two worlds Danny is a part of. The Hand, his sworn enemy, is smuggling heroin through the company, which then causes him to get into trouble with the board because he doesn't show up for important meetings, and that's because he's too busy trying to take them down in the middle of the night. And so these nightly escapades consist of Danny teaming up with Colleen Wing to take down the Hand by proving they're smuggling drugs into the city. Now keep in mind, Danny only met Colleen in the first episode, and yet by episode 5 they trust each other so much to the point that they're ready to go outside and do vigilante actions to take down the Hand. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a perfect way to build a relationship, really healthy. So they go down to the docks to stop the shipments, only to realize that they're not smuggling any drugs. And then Danny is so incompetent that he gets himself locked in a truck, and then he discovers the chemist, and then he gets the chemist stabbed, and then he's challenged by Madame Gao to compete in a tournament. And the tournament episode was actually pretty decent. It's one of the few episodes I actually did enjoy. There was some pretty decent fights and nice comic references, although the crazy karaoke knife guy was actually Scythe, and that was a super obscure reference, especially since they didn't even give him a costume. Like, Scythe was an assassin sent by Harold Meacham to take down the Iron Fist in Marvel Premiere issue 16. Like, that was super obscure. I didn't even realize that he was even in the show. And I really do think that's because he doesn't have a costume. Oh, and don't worry, we'll get onto the subject of costumes a little bit later on in the review. But as I was saying, the tournament episode was pretty cool. The scene where Gao forces Danny to withdraw is great. And that's because it's one of Madame Gao's best moments.
Withdraw from the duel, and she'll be spared.
That's dishonorable.
What do I care for honor?
But after the tournament episode, most of the episodes afterwards are just there to fill in time till we get to the finale. For example, the China episode is just there to make Danny even more conflicted for abandoning his post in Kunlun. I mean, that's pretty clear, seeing as how the whole drunken master fight was just him going, "Oh, Danny Rand, you failed Kunlun, Danny Rand, you left. You're no Iron Fist, Danny Rand. A real Iron Fist wouldn't have abandoned their post." Although I will admit, that fight scene is actually pretty okay. But whilst this is happening, Ward is going crazy, and he kills Harold. And then Harold just comes back to life, and then he kills his assistant with an ice cream scoop. Okay. It's like half of the show is just Danny doing stuff with the hand, and then the rest of it is the Meacham family drama. And then in comes in Bakuto and the other section of the hand. And this is the part where the show kind of gets interesting for a little bit, and mainly that's because Bakuto is teaching Danny how to actually be an Iron Fist, but then that just opens up a whole other can of worms. So you're telling me that Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, wasn't properly trained to be an Iron Fist in Kunlun? Like, what? So you're telling me that after Danny defeated Xiao Lao, Master Lei Kung the Thunderer and the rest of the elders of Kunlun just told Danny to wait by the pass and guard it? You're telling me they didn't actually train him on how to use the fist? You're telling me they didn't actually tell him how to recharge his chi? You're telling me he didn't learn how to channel his chi into both of his fists? Like, what the hell were they doing? No wonder everyone says he's the worst Iron Fist. It's because he is. They didn't train him. And then the show gives the audience the biggest middle finger it possibly can by showing that old Iron Fist footage. That old war footage of Orson Randall, I'm assuming it is Orson Randall because the costume design is basically the Orson Randall costume from the Matt Fraction and Ed Brubaker run. But that war footage of him channeling his chi into both of his fists and beating up those soldiers, that was exactly what I wanted to see from the show from the beginning, except it being Danny Rand. And now, the stuff with Bakuto and the hand division is interesting, I guess, but it highlights another problem with the show. The shift in villains is weird and annoying. So we've built out Madame Gao to be the primary villain, a member of the Hand, which totally contradicts season 1 of Daredevil where she wasn't shown to be part of the Hand. And then we've got Harold Meacham, who is the overarching / hidden villain, even though it's pretty obvious that he's the bad guy. I mean, he's got an evil lair with CCTV cameras tracking everybody. How is he not a villain? And then you've got Bakuto, who just comes out of nowhere and suddenly is the main leader of the Hand, even though he's part of a different sect of the Hand. And he just wants Danny because he wants the Iron Fist, but he never explains why he wants the Iron Fist. And this just gets even more puzzling when it comes to Defenders, because Gao and Bakuto work together in Defenders, but in Iron Fist they're against each other. It's really confusing. And then you've got Davos who enters the scene, and I think the stuff with Davos is the most interesting part, mainly because it's the most Kunlun based, and this was back in the time when I thought that the show was going to give us Kunlun flashbacks. Oh boy, was I mistaken. But hold that thought, I'll come back to that. But everything they did with Davos was quite cool. I liked how he was one of Danny's closest friends, a brother even. I love the idea of him being jealous of Danny, and how he wanted the Iron Fist ever since he was born. He believed it was his birthright. But he got over the fact that Danny took the fist. But then Danny took the fist and ran to New York. He abandoned Kunlun. That was super interesting, because it shows a conflict between his ideological beliefs about being the Iron Fist and protector of Kunlun, versus Danny, his brother, just abandoning him. Except it all boils down to the fact that when Danny confronts Davos and beats him in that fight, they boil down Davos' complex views on the Iron Fist being his birthright, and they make the reason why he's angry at Danny just so shallow. He's angry with Danny for abandoning his post, because he left without telling him. Like, what? You had all this complex motivation, and you boil it down to, my friend left me and didn't tell me. And then what makes it even worse is that he just leaves. Like, he appears for like a 1-second cameo at the end of episode 13, but other than that, he just leaves the show. Anyways, so after they kill Bakuto, they basically treat it like the show's over, even though we know there's a whole episode left. So then the DEA attacks Danny and Colleen, and we find out that Harold has come and taken over Rand Enterprises, and that he's framed Danny for all the illegal activity with the Hand. And ultimately, the finale is just Danny getting super mad that Harold was lying to him the whole time, and he wants revenge for killing his parents. And then by the end of the episode, they do the same thing from the comics where he confronts Harold and is about to kill him, but he doesn't. But it doesn't work like it does in the comics, because Meacham is just a maniacal villain who wants money, which is just so uninteresting compared to his comic counterpart who wants to die because of the guilt he feels for killing Danny's parents. Now, the biggest mistake of the show was not showing flashbacks to Kunlun and the origin, because that's the most interesting stuff you can do with Iron Fist. The origin for Iron Fist, although the writing is very outdated and is written in the second person, is really good because the concept of the origin is awesome. You have an outsider stuck in a mystical city where he learns kung fu and martial arts. He trains his mind and body but still can't get over the fact that he wants revenge on the man who killed his parents. He trains his body so hard that he's allowed the chance to earn the Iron Fist and fights a dragon. A dragon. This is one of the most exciting and cinematic things you could possibly do in the Marvel Universe, and yet you don't. And what's even more disappointing is that they teased the dragon. And the tease just makes no sense. So Danny fights Harold on the rooftop and goes, "I've been here before." And these two red lights suddenly turn into the dragon eyes of Xiao Lao. That has nothing to do with the situation Danny's in right now. And also, this is initially why I like the Davos stuff, because I all thought it was building to this. And also, let's talk about the ending of the show. What does the ending even mean? So, Danny and Colleen travel to Kunlun, only to find out that the passage is shut and outside are dead hand soldiers. Danny suddenly acts all surprised that the gateway to Kunlun is closed. He closes his fist, he looks at it, and he summons the Iron Fist. Like, what am I supposed to take from this? Danny knows that the pathway is only open for a certain amount of time, so why is he shocked that it's not there? The only aspect of the ending that makes sense is that Danny's angry that he wasn't there to protect Kunlun from the Hand. Now, here comes a little bit of a rant concerning the Iron Fist costume. I don't understand logically how Danny can get this costume without it seeming contrived. The Iron Fist costume should have been the thing he was wearing in those flashback scenes with Davos where he was guarding the pass, yet he's just wearing these green and yellow robes. But why? The Iron Fist costume isn't a costume, it's a uniform. Now, when Davos confronts Danny about why he abandoned Kunlun, Danny tells Davos that he's here to end the Hand. And if that's the case, then why isn't he wearing his Iron Fist uniform? It's just not something that he can just design on a piece of paper and create. It's a uniform of the Iron Fist. Even in the trailers for Iron Fist Season 2, when Danny and Davos are having that ceremonial fight, they're both wearing the mask of an Iron Fist because that's what they're training for. And also in the trailers for Iron Fist Season 2, Danny is just fighting crime in a hoodie and a rag around his mouth. So it's pretty clear that he's not fussed with creating a costume to fight crime. I mean, if he was really that concerned with making a costume, at the end of the Defenders, when he lights his fist up on that rooftop, he should have been wearing his costume. In summary, what I'm saying is, if Danny wasn't wearing the costume when he was guarding the pass of Kunlun, it makes no logical sense as to why he would have the costume now. And that breaks down simply into the creators of the show, Scott Buck especially, just doesn't understand the character of the Iron Fist. If you don't give Danny his costume, then you don't respect the character. Now, let's talk about Finn Jones' Iron Fist. I think that his performance is inconsistent, and that's mainly due to poor directing and poor writing. And now, everything I'm going to say about his performance here only really applies to this season and some episodes of The Defenders, because in certain scenes of The Defenders, I really enjoy Finn Jones' performance. He really captures the calm and mellow essence of Danny, and that's probably because basically in every interview I've seen, Finn Jones is like Danny Rand. And when we get to Luke Cage Season 2, Episode 10, man, do they really just redeem and fix this character. He feels like Danny Rand just straight off the page. But alas, we have to talk about Danny Rand from Season 1 of Iron Fist. So Danny starts off calm and mellow, and that's pretty cool. But then he has these random spasms of anger, and it just makes him look like a weird, crazy person. Like, that's not the character of Danny Rand. But then I've also seen people defend his performance, saying that if Danny Rand spent 15 years in Kunlun, he's still got the mind and brain of a young child. But to me, that makes no sense. He spent 15 years in a monastery strengthening his body and his mind. All these anger issues and outbursts should be non-existent because he should have found some sort of stillness. But yes, as I said before, Finn Jones does the best he can with the material he's given. Because I think with certain lines, he just absolutely nails them. But then there are other times where he's just putting on this knockoff Daredevil voice, and it gets grating. Now, Jessica Henwick as Colleen Wing does deliver a good performance, but certain aspects of her character just doesn't make any sense. For example, her being part of the Hand isn't foreshadowed very well. When we get to that part of the show, it just seems to come out of nowhere. And now, the Fight Club fights she does for money also don't factor into the overall plot, especially since earlier on she goes on about the Bushido Code and how fighting for money is dishonorable, but it just never comes back. Now, Colleen and Danny have good chemistry, but that's only because Finn Jones and Jessica Henwick have good chemistry. But I also don't get initially why she helps Danny prove that he really is Danny Rand. Like, was it just because she saw him getting attacked? It's never really explained. Most of their relationship building is done during these sexually charged Tai Chi sessions they have, but apart from that, their dialogue between one another at sometimes is just awful. Like, I get why both of them are connected. Danny was bored with protecting the path of Kunlun, and Colleen just needs to fight, but their relationship is never properly expanded upon. Now, Ward is somehow the character who has the best arc. He starts the season acting like a dickhead, and then by the end of the season, he's actually an okay guy. And most of that's due to the writing, I guess. I mean, Tom Pelphrey isn't the strongest actor, and yet somehow Ward's arc is the strongest. Like, why is your supporting character the most developed? I mean, Danny's whole arc of the first season is discovering that he can be both Danny Rand and the Iron Fist. And now we get to the shining light of the series, Harold Meacham, portrayed by David Wenham, who is just the best. He makes the poorly written Harold just super enjoyable, and that's mainly just because he's hamming it just so much. I mean, look at the scene where he's killing Kyle. Now, Joy Meacham isn't really a character, she flip-flops every other scene. One moment she's a nice person, One moment she's an evil business person. One scene she likes Danny, and then suddenly by the end of the show she wants to kill him. Like, what? Now, mostly what I have to say about Davos I've said beforehand in the review, but I think Sacha Dhawan is great. And also, let's give this show a round of applause. They actually made Claire bad. Like, how? You made Rosario Dawson look like a bad actress. And also, her final scene is just so out of character and just depressing. She's just like, oh, Danny, Colleen, you guys are messed up people. You will resort to violence, like, you guys are just weird, and then just walks off. Like, what? And they also make her and every other character quite ignorant too. Every time Danny mentions Kunlun, they all have to bring up the fact that, no, you didn't really fight a dragon. I mean, aliens have come down from the sky, people. You can accept a dragon. Now, the Hand are absolutely boring, and I don't get why they tried to make them a season-long big bad. Like, they weren't even that interesting in Daredevil Season 2. The only thing that was interesting about them was that they were just ninjas. And this show just gets rid of the whole ninja garb completely. They're not dressed like ninjas anymore, they're just generic Hollywood goons in leather jackets. And it's not only that, it's just that none of the members of the Hand have anything interesting to say. Gao is just there to manipulate Danny, and Bakuto's just there because he wants the Iron Fist. Other than that, there's no glue holding them together. And not only that, they don't even have a plan. There's no evil mastermind plan with the Hand. Danny's just there to fight them. Now, I don't have to rag on about the poor action. The constant quick cutting is awful. I mean, we don't even have to break down that hospital fight because it's garbage. And ultimately it comes down to Finn Jones doesn't look comfortable doing most of the fight scenes. I mean, even the scene where Bakuto teaches Danny how to recharge his chi, it's pretty clear that Finn Jones doesn't look comfortable doing any of these movements. And the thing that just infuriates me the most is that not only are the action sequences so far and few in between, but in most of the fights, Danny always looks like he's losing, which shouldn't be the case. He's a master of mixed martial arts. I don't get how he's losing. Once again, it just makes Danny look super incompetent. Although if I did have to compliment a fight, I will say Danny versus Davos in episode 12 was actually a pretty decent fight. And speaking of the Iron Fist, it looks great, but it's barely used. And once again, it just makes Danny look incompetent. But before we wrap this review up, let's talk about the intro. How bland and boring is the intro? Every Marvel Netflix show has an awesome and symbolic intro sequence. With Daredevil, you've got the summation of his character, Jessica Jones is done in the awesome art style of the Alias covers, and Luke Cage is all about Harlem. But with Iron Fist, you just have this weird CGI little model of Finn Jones' Iron Fist doing these bland karate moves. And not only that, the background is blue. Why is it blue? It should be green. And why is the little silver model of Danny spewing out silver energy? It should be yellow. And I do like Iron Fist's theme. I think it's pretty good, but wow, does the show make it sound so bland. I've heard covers of this theme on YouTube sound 1,000 times better than the one they decided to use in the show. Ultimately, Iron Fist Season 1 is let down by just a poor story. A lot of it doesn't have any real consequence. You've got an annoying and incompetent lead character, you've got terrible action fight sequences, and you've just got super bland villains. But Season 2 looks interesting, and very promising. Just please don't be a letdown. I need Iron Fist to be given justice on screen, and I'm hoping Season 2 will do that. Hey, thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, leave me a comment down below. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Hit the notification bell to stay notified. My social media links are down in the description, so if you give them a look and a follow, that'd be real nice. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.